This week, the impact of attacks on journalists and how it's affecting reporting the news. An international organisation gives voice to silenced journalists. One of the fastest growing global financial news brands comes to South Africa, and why a young entrepreneur's line of skin-coloured lingerie is gaining brand traction. First up this week, and in recent weeks, there have been a number of confrontations between politicians and journalists, some of it physical and some of it on social media, online. And the question, I guess, is all of this going to ramp up ahead of next year's election? Ranjeni Munsami is with us. She's an associate editor at TISO Blackstar, a frontline journalist herself, and has also written most recently and quite extensively on the issue. A very warm welcome to you. It's not my imagination, is it? The ante seems to have been upped between the media and the political firmament. Oh,
definitely. There is a level of hostility that I have not seen for a long time. And it's quite bizarre as to why this is. But when you think about it, Jeremy, it's not unique to South Africa. If you look at what's going on in the United States, for example, they're running battles between the White House press corps and President Donald Trump's White House. And the reason for this is that there is contestation over the narrative. And because there is no defined narrative, and we're all kind of feeling our way through. And I think people in power don't quite like what they're seeing as reflected in the media, and they're taking it out on the messenger.
Do you think this is orchestrated?
I don't think so. I think that we are in a space where there are no defined political enemies in our country. And I think that people feel that if they muscle the media and if they confront journalists in how we do our jobs, in the way we present news and analysis, that we'll be on the back foot, we'll be more cautious in the way we present things. And that does happen. There is always the running danger of self-censorship when there is intimidation from political players.
I want to talk about self-censorship in just a moment, but you talk about that contested narrative that exists not only in this country but around the world. In many ways, that's a good thing. The narrative should always be contested, surely, but the sense I'm getting is that maybe we've overreached it slightly. Can we pull back from this, or is this going to just accelerate as we approach what is going to be a very, very difficult election year next year?
We must pull back, Jeremy.
How do we pull back?
The situation is unsustainable because you cannot have politicians attacking journalists merely on the basis of their race, merely because they ask questions, because they don't like how the questions are framed, because they don't like the way news is packaged, so they call it fake news. Donald Trump, that's from the Donald Trump playbook, and people here are doing the same thing. How we pull it back is that the media needs to assert its place and say, that's not your business. If a media company is hiring somebody as a presenter, particularly the public broadcaster, that's our decision. That's an editorial decision. If you don't like it, then let's engage, let's talk about it. But this is our decision. Once you, as a politician, feel that you have the power to dictate who media companies employ.
They are going to take the gap, aren't they?
Absolutely.
Sometimes you talk about the media houses themselves needing to be a little bit more assertive. Sometimes we see rather woolly statements being issued either from the South African National Editors Forum or from the media houses themselves. If the media is to become more assertive, how do they push back without damaging the relationship?
Well, I think
because that relationship is important.
Yes, the relationship is important, and the media is not protected territory, but we have rights and we need to protect our freedoms. But there needs to be healthy engagement. And the problem is that there is no continuous engagement. We don't have open lines of communication ordinarily. It happens when there's a crisis. So, for example, during the Zuma years, the media just accepted, for example, that the president never had media briefings. The last real media briefing that the president had with the political press corps, in an informal state, was 2014. And he left office in 2018. That is untenable. You cannot have that. But the media industry accepted it because they took on this role. Well, what are we going to do about it? We can't force it. But our constitution impels political leaders to be transparent and to provide information to the public they serve. We are the media.
And as a senior operative yourself within this space, when you engage either formally or informally with those politicians, and you raise these particular issues, what do they tell you?
Well, then it's a completely different story. It's like, oh no, you know, let's relax, let's calm down. It's not about you, and it's not about so and so. Then who is it about?
Precisely, because it is.
It is. If you attack journalists and editors, you are defining them in a certain way, and then you expect us not to respond to it. How do you expect this conversation to unfold? You cannot just simply make blanket statements about journalists and not expect an engagement.
Ranjeni, just as we draw to the end of this, the one consequence that you alluded to a little earlier is perhaps the most concerning, is that the intimidation can lead to self-censorship. In other words, you're confronting a senior politician about something and simply you decide either to soften the question or simply not go there because it's just going to be a whole lot easier. That is the real danger of this. What happens if that perpetuates? Well,
the reason why I wrote about this was the attack by the EFF deputy leader, Flo Chivambo, on a journalist in a parliamentary precinct. Now, I question what was the reason for this attack. Why was this journalist choked? Because he was white? Because he asked a question? What is the reason? And we need to know this, you know, from the outset, what aggravates political leaders. Because we need to do our work. We're always going to ask questions. We're always going to approach you. If that offends you, then we have a problem. And the thing is, if journalists are afraid to ask questions in whatever context, then that is censorship. I'd rather not say this because it's going to have this and that effect.
If I have a politician in front of me just saying, let me just pull back slightly.
Yes.
You know insidiously you're doing it. Yes. That's the worst possible thing.
Yes. And that's not tolerable. You have to ask what you need to ask.
I want to end this with the public service announcement, if we can. There would be many young reporters who perhaps haven't got as many scars on their back as you and I do, who would find themselves in a situation like this, whether it be on a one-to-one field interview, whether it's at a news conference, whether it's via telephone, trying to interview a politician. What advice would you give to that younger coterie of reporters who haven't played this game before?
We exist in an abnormal situation now. This is not how it ought to be, particularly in the field of politics. And they need to come in knowing that their responsibility is to ask questions, to tell the story as they see it, not how other people think it ought to be. And that needs to be the guiding principle always, that the truth must prevail. There is always pressure on journalists on the issue of objectivity. People have perspectives, and that needs to be balanced off. The objectivity and perspectives. And
also the fact is, if you're in this business, you have to be courageous. There's no doubt about that.
Oh, absolutely.
Otherwise, go and do something else.
Yes, yeah. We're not here for the glamour.
That I can attest to. Come back. Let's do that interview some other time. Ranjeni Munsami from TISO Black Star. Thank you very much indeed. Important words there. Very quickly, I want to stay with journalism. The Swedish branch of the global advocacy group Reporters Without Borders has been altering billboards on Google Street View so that they feature quotes critical of world leaders. In some cases, the comments coming from journalists who've been jailed or executed for speaking out against certain regimes and leaders. Now, the stunt works by uploading photoshopped spherical images into Google Maps, replacing a real street view with a slightly altered version. The organisation wanting to acknowledge those journalists who've been silenced, saying that no regime should get away with threatening or censoring or arresting, as we've just been talking about, any member of the media. The images appear on street views as far as Bangalore, Istanbul, Harare, Moscow and New York City. The project is called Billboards Beyond Borders. This is Mags on Media. Next, one of the world's largest financial news platforms goes live in South Africa. We'll also take a look at a funny public service announcement that calls on young people to drink responsibly.